What is up, Rad Potential YouTube channel? Welcome to another rad informational video of which I have yet to figure out a cool title for. So, and by that I mean, like, what should we call our rad informational videos besides that? But what we're here to talk about is rear ends, because car guys like rear ends, or girls like rear ends. So basically, in this video we're gonna go over all of the stock rear end options for a first-gen Rx7, and I'll kind of explain everything. So, not a whole lot of like cool working on cars. Maybe I'll do a burnout at the end, but we're gonna talk about some stuff that you guys need to know. So, here before me we have 3 Rx7 rear ends, and we have 3 very different Rx7 rear ends. The third one is under the car, okay? So I'm just going to use this as a talking point, but I can explain things on these other ones. So we're going to start from the very beginning of Rx7. So, 1978-79, you would have bought an Rx7. It would have been 4x110 bolt pattern, like this. This car here, the plus wheels. Even my silver car is 4x110. And it would have had drum brakes and an open differential. 79, 78, 79, and 80. Only options were drum brakes and an open differential. Now, that differential gear ratio is 3.9. So, what I have before me here, this one, disregard the like extra mounts for the panhard bar and stuff, because this is some custom concoctions for a rear end. But what I have before me here is a drum brake rear end housing. Okay, now how you can tell it's drum brake, and you might be saying, no, you're lying because it's got disc brakes on it. Well, let me get to that. Drum brake rear end housing is going to have 4 bolts on the end of it. The axle retainer is going to have 4 bolts. See that? So you got 1 back there, 2, 3, 4 that hold this axle on. And by that, the retainer, if you don't know what the retainer is, I'll show you on this axle. See this little piece right here? This 3-bolt piece that spins, and the backing plate's got 3 bolts. Well, that piece bolts to the housing right here, to the housing flange, bolts to that and holds the bearing into the race, which then holds the axle in. Pretty standard. So, 79, 80, drum brakes, open diff. 81, 82, and 83 were also, the base model car is drum brakes, open diff, 4x110. Okay, so the 79, 80, 81, 82, 83 all had an option for drum brakes, open diff, and 4x110. Now, come 82 and 83, Mazda came out with a model called the GSL. Okay, a GSL got you disc brakes in the rear and a 3.9 limited slip. Okay, so I'll repeat that. Disc brakes in the rear, 3.9 limited slip. It also got you a bunch of other cool stuff on the car, but that's the important rear end stuff. Now, up until 83, all of these axles shared the same wheel bearing size. Okay, so you're going to hear that referred to as small bearing. Alright, and the reason I have these two before you here is so I can show you. So notice this diameter right here for the wheel bearing is much smaller than this one here. Okay, big wheel bearing, little wheel bearing, so that's something to keep note. But those are all going to be a small bearing axle, and the front spindles are the same way, small bearing axle up to 83. 82 and 83 you can get a GSL, which comes with a limited slip. It's still 4x110, and it comes with disc brakes. They are non-vented, much like these right here. Okay, the reason that that's all important is because my silver car has a rear axle out of an 83 GSL, which means it's still small bearing, it's still 4x110, and it'll bolt right into this. The other piece of this that is very important to the small bearing setups is the Driveshaft flange. Okay, so this guy right here is a small bearing Driveshaft flange. So the holes are rectangular, not square, and it's also much smaller in diameter. Now, it is hub centric, so when you put your flange on here, it will center. So the drive shaft, basically, so the drive shaft from a 78 to an 83 is all the same. Okay. Now automatics might be different. I know for a fact on the front nose of it, the transmission yoke is probably different, but someone can correct me. I've never owned an automatic Rx7. I feel bad for those of you that do, but that's what it is. So I can't confirm if an automatic diff's different. However, I would bet it's the same because no one's ever specified auto or manual to me. So 78 to 83, small bearing, small drive shaft flange, and you can get a GSL. Now we move on to 83 and 84, or 84 and 85, okay? 84 and 85, the car called the GSLSE came out, and that had a 13B fuel-injected engine, and all sorts of bells and whistles, and bigger brakes, and all sorts of cool stuff. So you might ask, right, we're putting bigger brakes on it, got to have a bigger axle, right, more power. So 84 and 85, the GSL SE models came with 4x110 or 4x114 bolt pattern, front and rear. Came with a 4.10 rear axle ratio, 4.1 rear axle ratio, and a limited slip as well. Now these axles, if you remember I just said there's a difference in bearings, 84 and 85 are big bearing cars. So what does that mean? On your axle, in 84 and 85, for both the regular GS, GSL, and GSLSEs are all big bearing. Okay? So you can't take a GSLSE axle shaft, this piece here, and put it in that axle. It won't work, right? Or you could switch the bearing, but it won't just pop in, and the flange is different. So keep that in mind as well. Also, the drive shaft flange is much bigger on a GSLSE, or even your 84-85 drum brake axles, which I don't have one of those sitting around here. So, same thing, only the GSLSE was 4x114. The GSL and the GS from 84 and 85 are both 4x110. So, in theory, yes, you could take an 84 or 85 GSL axle, or even a GS axle that's drum brakes, and bolt it under your pre-84 car, so put it under your 78 to 83 car, and it would work. It would just be, the wheel bearing size is different. Most people don't like to mix and match. The other thing is you would need the drive shaft to mate up to that. However, I'll tell you about the Driveshaft Hack here in a little bit. So the other thing that is super awesome. So imagine you want to put a limited slip in your car, but you don't want to change the brakes, or you don't care to change drum brakes to disc brakes, right? So you can take a small bearing pumpkin, or third member, whatever you want to call it, which I have a third member sitting here. So this is the part that holds your axle shafts go in here. This is your limited slip, which this one is, and then this is your axle flange here. So you can take this piece, and as long as you match a small bearing pumpkin to a small bearing rear end and a large bearing pumpkin to a large bearing rear end, they're interchangeable. So, for example, this being a drum brake axle has a limited slip in it, right? Because this is a GSL pumpkin just bolted into that axle. So you could keep your drum brakes on both ends, pop them all apart, slide the axles out, pull the third member out, put a limited slip one in, bolt it back in, hook the drive shaft up. And boom, you have a limited slip. You just have to find one. That's not attached to the rest of the axle. Most of them are all together. So keep that in mind. And that works both ways for small bearing and large bearing cars. So for the large bearing rear ends, you have more options, because you could put a 3.9 limited slip in, or you could put a 4.1 limited slip in out of the GSLSE. Okay, now, sticking with large bearing, the ring and pinion, and this may be true for small bearing, but I've known people only do it really to GSL-SE stuff. I'm pretty sure the ring and pinion's the same. So you can switch to some of these other ring and pinions that people run. So like the Kia 477 diff ratio, you can put that ring and pinion in there. You can also, Mazda used to sell a whole slew of them. So like I have a 4.88 rear gear in my rally car. So that's stuff that you can take the ring gear off and the pinion out and switch them. I know for sure people do those in the large bearing rears. I haven't heard or seen anybody that can do it in a small bearing rear. However, I would bet they're the same. They're pretty much the exact same, and I'm pretty sure that pumpkin right there will fit in that other rear axle. So just keep that in mind, do your research. If you're switching gears out, you probably know all this stuff already, but I'm just putting this out there for people. So, the Driveshaft Hack. How do you get your either a GSLSE axle under your first gen without changing the drive shaft, or how do you get a small drive shaft to mount to a GS. Yeah, same thing. Anyway, so basically, all of the Mazda Rx7 drive shafts are hub-centric in the center. So that means there's a conical piece in the middle that fits into this hole right here, okay? It fits in there to center it on the pinion flange. Now, that is awesome because you can take a 79 drive shaft like what I have in this car. It will center up on here so you don't have to worry about it being weird, and then all you have to do is re-drill this flange for the rectangular bolt holes, put the bolts in it, and you're on your merry way. So when I had this, is actually the axle I had underneath this car, when I had this axle under that car, I still had the SA drive shaft in it. I just re-drilled it, which is either it's on this pumpkin or that pumpkin, or it got moved to another one, but you can just re-drill it and then it'll bolt right in. So, which is super awesome. So the other thing is, you might wonder what the heck's going on with this one. So this is basically an axle I acquired in a race car bundle that came. It's drum brake axle set up for a panhard bar, and somebody had modified it to accept like disc brake calipers from a GSL axle, but on the drum brake housing. So it's got these little fancy brackets made that mount on here to mount the calipers and all that nonsense, and then it's set up for a panhard bar, and it also has these really sweet cooling ducts on here as well. And I say that this is a limited slip, but this is actually like a locked differential, so it has a spool in it. So basically it's like having a welded, but without it being welded. So I don't know what I'm going to use it for, but it's a good talking piece for this video. So that's a ton of information, and I'm sure that there's stuff that I forgot, but off the top of my head, that's everything that I can remember about these. So my personal favorite combination, or at least what I liked, is I had a 410 in this before. It worked good, but I do a lot more street driving than I do racing, so I liked my 3.9 for the highway a little bit better, so I kept my 3.9. And even before, whenever I had a GS LSE axle under it, I also put a 3.9 open from a regular old GS in there, so that way I could still have my highway gear, just because I liked that kind of thing. Let's see what else. I don't know if that pumpkin's laying around here somewhere. It probably is. But that other pumpkin on the ground there is a GS LSE pumpkin that I've had for a while. What other info is there really? I guess the other things that are to note that are very important. Anything that's not a GS LSE, or I guess we'll just say this, 84, 85, all had lug studs, so it would have studs like this. Whereas like a regular, oh, there you go, like that's a GS LSE axle. Whereas a early model, so the GS from 83, the small bearing ones, had lug bolts. So instead of having a stud, you would have a bolt that goes through, much like a BMW. So something like this, you would run. However, you can change it. So my car, basically, go on any BMW thing, buy a lug stud conversion kit for a BMW, and it should fit your Rx7 setup. The thread pitch is the same. I think it's like 10 by, it's either 10 or 12 by 1.5 or something like that. I think it's 10 by 1.5 or 1.25, but look it up, make sure. There's tons of write-ups on it, but your standard like E30 lug conversion kit will fit that. Let's see, what other combination stuff do I need to tell you? I think that's pretty much it. You can see a lot of the suspension geometry stuff from here. So this is like your Watts link provision. This is just like a brake line guard here. You've got your shock perch there, your upper link perch here, your lower link perch here. I know there are people that have cut off the axle flanges out here and then made like a dual caliper kit for drifting. So there's some stuff that you can do with those. Another awesome piece of information that I will share with you. You can take only a GS LSE axle flange is like big, right? Because it's 4x114, so the diameter of the flange itself is substantially bigger than the flange on a GSL or a small bearing one, or a 4x110 axle. So what we do, like for example on this brown car, and if you were following along earlier and saw some stuff on that, you'd see it, but what you can do is you can take this axle flange right here, knock out 3 of the 4 studs, bolt a 5x114.3 like wheel spacer or something that hub centers on this, and this right here. Make sure it hub centers bolted on, and then you can drill this axle flange for 5 lug and put the studs back through it in the 5-lug configuration, you'll still use one of the same. So one of them will stay the same. You'll drill 4 new holes and jam that through it. Then take the brake rotor, which I have one over here. Take this brake rotor, mark it the same way. Sorry about my shadow. Mark it the same way and drill this for 5-lug, and then you can have 5-lug on the back of your Rx7. It will not fit. The bolt pattern physically won't fit on the smaller flanged axle, so you'd have to use the GS-LSD axle. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. I'm probably missing stuff, but feel free, as always, questions in the comments. I'll try my best to answer every one of them. No, the brake calipers are not the same. So, like your disc brake caliper for a GSL and your disc brake caliper for a GS-LSD, totally different. So you can't switch them back and forth. I know there's a shortage of GS-LSD rear brake calipers. So, no, none of mine are for sale. Let's see what else. I think that, like I said, I think that's pretty much it. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions. And also let me know if you can run that Kia differential gear on the small bearing third member. But with that, thanks for tuning in. Subscribe if you want to see some more stuff at the Rad Ranch here. And the next video we're going to be cranking on that white rally car, getting it all torn down and doing some work. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. Keep it rad.